It was one of those quiet nights, the kind where the highway seemed to stretch on forever, uninterrupted by the usual traffic. The headlights of my patrol car cut through the dark, a solitary beacon against the stillness of the road. I had been on duty for hours, and honestly, I was ready for the shift to end. I cruised along, barely thinking about anything, just letting the hum of the engine be my companion. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something, just a slight movement. A black car, sleek and low to the ground, sped past me in the opposite direction. My instincts kicked in. It was a brief flash, but I caught a glimpse of the driver. For some reason, I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't quite right. So, I turned on my lights, making a sharp U-turn. I was already prepared for the usual. The routine of pulling someone over. A quick check, a few questions, maybe a warning if they were lucky. But when the car pulled over, the driver didn't seem to flinch. Instead, he calmly put on his hazards, his hands resting on the wheel. I approached the car with a sense of certainty, this was going to be just another stop. As I reached the driver's side window, I gave him my usual greeting. "Good evening, sir. I need to see your license and registration." The man turned to look at me, his face calm, his eyes locked on mine. There was something about him that seemed familiar. "Sure, officer," he said, his voice smooth, calm. I waited for him to hand over the documents. But something lingered in the back of my mind. Something about his presence was different from the usual stops. The man handed me his license and registration without hesitation, his eyes never leaving mine. As I took the papers from him, I couldn't help but notice the name on the license. It struck me immediately. I had seen it before, in the headlines. It was the name of a prominent figure, a high-profile attorney known across the state. I froze for a moment, the paperwork still in my hand. I glanced back at the man in the driver's seat, really looking at him for the first time. His appearance matched the photos I had seen, sharp, confident, but still down to earth. "Are you?" I started, but the words stuck in my throat. He raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a small, almost amused smile. "Yes, I am." I couldn't believe it. I had just pulled over someone who was well known and influential, someone who likely had more power than most people I came across. "Sorry about the stop," I said, the words slipping out awkwardly. "It's just routine, you know. Nothing personal." His smile didn't fade, but I noticed his gaze had shifted slightly, as though he was sizing me up. "I understand, officer. I know how these things go." I took a deep breath, feeling a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. I had no idea how to proceed now. I wasn't just dealing with a regular citizen, this was someone with connections, someone whose reputation could bring the wrong kind of attention if things went sideways. I handed him back the registration and license, my fingers slightly trembling. "Everything seems in order here," I said, trying to sound composed. "You're free to go." But as I turned to walk back to my patrol car, I felt a sharp twinge of regret. Why had I even pulled him over in the first place? There was nothing wrong. Was it just a feeling in my gut, or had I been looking for an excuse? My mind was racing. I'd just made a mistake, and I knew it. As I walked back to my patrol car, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What was I thinking? I had let the routine of the job cloud my judgment. I had seen a car speeding by and instantly reacted without considering that there might not even be a reason to stop him. I had made an assumption based on, what? Nothing concrete. Just a feeling. I sat back in my cruiser, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the flashing lights that still lit up the night. The man's name had been burned into my memory. I could already imagine the stories about him, the cases he'd worked on, the impact he had in the legal world. The power he held. But it wasn't just his name that made me uneasy. It was his presence, calm, collected, in control. I realized I had made a snap decision, and now, I was facing the consequences of that decision. He wasn't just a regular driver, this was someone who, if he chose, could make my life very complicated. I stared at the rearview mirror, watching the man in the black car still sitting there, waiting. I had given him the go-ahead, but it felt like there was an unspoken tension between us. The fact that he hadn't even flinched when I approached. The calm way he handed me his documents. He knew how this worked. He had probably been through countless encounters like this before, but somehow, this one felt different. I thought about what I could do next. Should I just let him go? Or should I do something more, rethink the whole stop, apologize, maybe explain myself? But what would that even sound like? Would it come across as insincere? And would it make things worse? Before I could second-guess myself any further, I saw him in my rearview mirror again. The black car was still there, but now, he was shifting in his seat, preparing to drive away. I knew then it was time to let it go. I took a deep breath, grabbed the radio, and spoke the words I dreaded. "Dispatch, I'll be clear from the stop. No action needed." As I watched the car pull away, I felt a strange mix of relief and something else. I had dodged a bullet tonight. Or so I thought. As the black car disappeared into the night, I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I was almost relieved it was over. No incident. No drama. Just another car on the highway. But my mind wouldn't let it go. The name on his license, the look in his eyes, it all felt like a door I had opened but quickly slammed shut. There was something about that interaction that kept nagging at me, pulling me back in. I reached for my radio again, hesitated, and then clicked the button. "Dispatch, I need a favor," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the unease I felt. "Can you run a background check on a driver I just pulled over?" A few seconds of silence passed before the dispatcher responded. "Sure, what's the name?" I gave them the name, still trying to shake the feeling that I might be stepping into something deeper than I realized. There was another long pause. Then, the dispatcher came back on, their voice slightly more serious now. "Just a heads up, officer, this is not just any random guy. He's pretty well known. High profile, you could say. He's involved in a major ongoing case." My heart skipped a beat. The man in the black car. Of course. I should have known. He wasn't just some random driver on the highway. He was a key player in something much larger, something that I probably didn't even understand fully. "What kind of case?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but my mind was already spiraling. The dispatcher's response was short. "Top-level legal matters. You don't need to know more. But be careful." I felt my palms start to sweat, the unease settling back into my chest. I was no longer dealing with just a traffic stop. I was tangled up in something much more complex, and I didn't even know what that something was yet. I sat there for a moment, staring into the rearview mirror, as if the man would suddenly turn around and come back. But the road behind me was empty. The silence around me was deafening, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I knew then that I had made a choice I couldn't take back. The minutes dragged on as I sat in the cruiser, my thoughts racing. I had let him go. I had made the decision to let a high-profile figure slip away with nothing more than a routine stop. But now that I knew who he was, now that I had a glimpse of the power he wielded, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right call. I wasn't supposed to be starstruck or intimidated by anyone, no matter their status. I was a police officer. It was my job to enforce the law, not to worry about who someone was or what influence they had. But the reality of the situation felt heavier now. The man I had just let go was a key player in something much bigger than anything I was involved in. I checked my rearview mirror again. No sign of him. He had disappeared down the road, like a shadow fading into the night. But even with the absence of his car, I felt like I could still feel his presence, looming just beyond the edge of my thoughts. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It had been almost 10 minutes since the stop, and I realized I was still sitting there, doing nothing. The radio crackled to life, pulling me back to the present. "Officer Jackson, you still on the road?" It was dispatch, checking in. "Yeah," I answered, my voice sounding different to my own ears. More distant, unsure. "Everything clear on your end?" the dispatcher asked. I hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "Yeah, it's all good. I've cleared the stop. No issues." There was a slight pause, and then the dispatcher's voice softened. "All right, just be careful out there. It's a quiet night, but things can turn on a dime. Don't let your guard down." "Copy that," I said, even though I knew the real danger wasn't out on the road, it was in my own head. I had been too quick to make that stop. Too quick to judge. And now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something I couldn't control. I knew I had to move on. I had to keep going, like I always did. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Every minute felt like a weight added to my chest, and I couldn't escape the sense that I had crossed a line. I reached for the ignition and started the engine, trying to force myself to focus on the road ahead. But as I pulled back onto the highway, I couldn't stop thinking about the man I'd just pulled over. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time I'd cross paths with him. I drove for miles, the hum of the engine and the steady glow of my headlights the only things keeping me company. I tried to focus on the road, on the task at hand, but my mind kept drifting back to that encounter. To the man I had pulled over. The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a critical mistake, one I might not even fully understand yet. The highway stretched on, empty for as far as I could see, but somehow it felt like I was driving in circles, trapped by my own thoughts. The man's calm demeanor had unsettled me. It wasn't just his name, it was how he held himself. He knew exactly what he was doing. And I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had pressed him more, if I had asked the right questions, dug deeper into why he was really out here tonight. Suddenly, my radio crackled again, snapping me out of my spiraling thoughts. "Officer Jackson, we've got a 10 to 23 on your location. Possible disturbance in progress." I took a sharp breath, the tension in my shoulders rising. The call snapped me back to reality, forcing me to focus. The disturbance was far enough away, but the route was familiar. It was a small roadside bar, nothing serious, usually just some drunks fighting over nothing. But still, the idea of something escalating had me on high alert. I flicked on my sirens and turned the wheel, speeding toward the call. But as I made the turn, my mind started to race again. What if this wasn't just a random disturbance? What if it had something to do with the man I'd pulled over? What if this was part of something larger that I had just stumbled into? I pushed those thoughts away, focusing on the task at hand. The bar was just ahead, its neon lights flickering in the distance. I parked quickly and got out of the car, the cool night air biting at my skin. A couple of people were standing outside, stumbling toward each other, their voices rising in anger. I approached cautiously, my hand resting near my holster. But before I could get close, a car pulled into the parking lot behind me. The headlights blinded me for a moment, but as the car came into view, my breath caught. It was the same black car. The man. He was standing by the driver's side, a briefcase in his hand. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Something was happening. And I had no idea what it was. I froze, my eyes locked on the man as he stepped out of the black car. His movements were measured, deliberate, as though he was entirely unbothered by the chaos unfolding around him. The flashing lights of my patrol car reflected off the sleek surface of his vehicle, casting eerie shadows across his face. But what really struck me was the way he looked at me, calm, knowing, almost as if this moment had been predestined. For a split second, I wondered if he had somehow followed me. The car had been parked just behind mine, almost as if it had been waiting for me to make the turn. My pulse quickened as I tried to keep my composure. I walked toward him slowly, my hand still near my holster, unsure of what was happening. The sounds of the disturbance faded into the background as I focused on the man standing before me. "Everything all right, officer?" he asked, his voice smooth and low. The question was casual, almost like he was trying to comfort me, but it only made me more anxious. I couldn't find the words at first. My mind was still spinning from the earlier stop, from the dispatcher's warning. I had no idea why he was here, but I could feel the weight of his presence like a pressure in my chest. "What are you doing here?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sharper than I intended. "You weren't involved in this, were you?" He chuckled lightly, as if amused by my question. "I'm just here for some business, officer. Nothing too serious. Just keeping things in check." I wasn't buying it. There was something too deliberate about his words, something that told me this wasn't just some coincidence. I glanced around, noticing that the people outside the bar had grown quiet, watching us. It felt like they were waiting for something to happen, too. "Business?" I repeated, trying to keep my tone steady. "What kind of business?" He didn't answer immediately, just met my gaze with that same calm expression. Finally, after a long pause, he gave me a subtle nod toward the bar's entrance. "You might want to take care of that disturbance first, officer. It looks like it's escalating." I followed his gaze, seeing two men now shouting at each other in the doorway of the bar. One of them was pushing the other, and the situation was growing tense. But even as I turned to face the scene, my gut told me something wasn't right. This wasn't about the bar. This wasn't just about some random fight. The man in front of me knew exactly what he was doing. Before I could turn back to ask him another question, he was already walking away, slipping into the shadows. I watched him go, my mind racing. I had no idea what was really happening, but I had a feeling that I was on the edge of something much bigger than a routine traffic stop or a bar fight. I had to follow him. I didn't know why, but I couldn't let this go. I hesitated for only a moment before following him. My instincts were screaming at me to stay put, to handle the disturbance at the bar, but everything in me told me that the man, the one I'd pulled over hours ago, was the key to what was really going on. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something far bigger than I could handle. I moved quickly, my boots hitting the pavement with a sharp, deliberate rhythm as I crossed the parking lot. The neon lights from the bar flickered overhead, casting an unsettling glow on the scene. The two men who had been arguing were now locked in a full-on brawl, but even as the chaos erupted behind me, I couldn't focus on anything except the man who had just slipped into the shadows. I rounded the corner of the bar, scanning the area. There was no sign of him yet. The parking lot was nearly empty now, except for his black car. It was parked a few spaces down, its engine off, but I felt it watching me, like it knew I was about to find out something I wasn't supposed to know. I stopped just before the alley that ran behind the bar, peeking around the corner cautiously. My heart was pounding in my chest. It was quiet back here, too quiet. Then I saw him, standing near the back door of the bar, talking to someone else. The silhouette of another figure, a man dressed in a dark suit, stood opposite him. Their conversation was low, too muffled for me to hear, but the exchange seemed tense. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my boots crunching lightly on the gravel beneath my feet. I wanted to get closer, hear what they were saying, but something held me back. My gut told me to stay out of sight. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I tried to stay hidden behind the dumpster, watching them. The man in the suit handed something to the one I had pulled over earlier. It was brief, almost too quick to be noticed, but my eyes caught the flash of a small envelope, sealed, heavy. My pulse quickened as I watched the exchange. This wasn't business as usual. This was a deal. A transaction. The man in the suit said something I couldn't hear, then turned and walked back toward the street. The man I had stopped earlier stood there for a moment, watching him leave, before slipping the envelope into the inside pocket of his jacket. I could feel my heart race as I stepped back, retreating into the shadows. I needed to process what I had just seen. I had no idea what was in that envelope, but I had a sinking feeling that I had just stumbled across something dangerous. Something that could turn everything upside down. I needed to get out of here. But as I turned to leave, I heard a voice call out from behind me, sharp and commanding. "Officer Jackson." I spun around, instinctively reaching for my radio. But the man was already there, standing in the alley, blocking my path. "I think it's time we have a little chat," he said, his voice calm, but there was a certain finality to it. I knew right then that my night had just taken a turn for the worse. I stood frozen, my hand still hovering near my holster. The man's eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I felt like I was the one being scrutinized. Like I was the one under investigation. The air between us thickened, charged with an unspoken tension that seemed to draw us closer, even though every part of me screamed to step back. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice sounding shaky even to me. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step toward me, his movements slow, deliberate. I didn't know what to expect, whether he would speak or take action, but his presence felt suffocating. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the sound of my own breathing too loud in the silence. "You've already seen too much tonight, officer," he said quietly. "And I'm afraid I can't let you leave here without understanding what's at stake." His words hung in the air, cold and heavy. I wasn't sure if he was trying to intimidate me or if he was being matter-of-fact, but whatever it was, it worked. I felt a surge of adrenaline flood my system, making my palms sweat and my head spin. This wasn't just a random encounter. This wasn't about a traffic stop or a simple disturbance at a bar. This was something bigger, darker, and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to steady my breath, but the words felt weak. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. He didn't look surprised by my response. "No, you don't. But you will. It's just a matter of time." The tension was thick enough to choke on, and I realized that I had no idea who this man really was, what kind of power he had. He wasn't just someone involved in legal cases, he was a player in something much larger. The envelope, the hidden meeting behind the bar, it all pointed to a network I was clearly not supposed to be a part of. And now, I was standing on the precipice, one step away from diving into something I didn't fully understand. "I'm not involved in anything," I started, trying to keep my voice even, but the weight of his gaze made me feel like I was caught in a lie. "I'm just doing my job." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he nodded, as if he were deciding something in his mind. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You've made a choice tonight. You crossed a line. It doesn't matter how small or insignificant you think it was, you're involved now. Whether you like it or not." I took a step back, my hand finally gripping my radio. I could call for backup, but in that moment, I wasn't sure who would even show up, or what they would do when they found out what I had witnessed. "You don't want to do this," I said, trying to sound authoritative, but I knew it wasn't convincing. My mind was running through options, but none of them seemed to lead to an easy way out. "Trust me, officer," he said, his voice growing colder. "It's already done." And just like that, he turned, walking back toward the parking lot, leaving me standing there, in the alley, caught between fear and confusion. I stood there for a long time after he disappeared, staring at the empty space where he had been. My mind raced, trying to piece together everything that had just happened, everything I had seen. But I knew one thing for sure, my life, my career, everything was about to change, and not in any way I could have predicted. I didn't know who the man really was or what his game was, but I had a sinking feeling that I was just beginning to scratch the surface of something that could destroy everything I knew. As I finally turned and made my way back to the cruiser, I realized I was no longer just a bystander to this situation. I was involved now. Whether I wanted to be or not, I had a role to play in whatever game this man was running. And there was no turning back.